Blog Talk Radio.
And good morning, everyone, or good evening, or good afternoon, whatever the case may be, somewhere around this rotating globe. Welcome to the other side of midnight. That kind of magical time between dusk and dawn where, well, you know, the usual extraordinary things happen, except, as you probably heard me say a million times by now, this weird magical time is no longer restricted to this time between dusk and dawn. It's happening 24/7. It's arriving in waves, in crescendos, in piling on of extraordinary things on extraordinary things on extraordinary things, and it's affecting everything from climate to consciousness to the verboten word, politics. I mean, how does our Western consciousness reflect itself in the day-to-day activities of mice and men? Through the political lens. And once you put that lens in place, there's an awful lot of deepening morality plays going on right in plain view, with people being forced to make choices, with people trying to talk with each other and for some reason just talking past each other. And it has nothing to do with intelligence. It's really, really weird. And it's getting weirder. And if you think you've seen anything yet, well, you ain't been listening very carefully. Now, one of the things that's going to happen in the next 48 hours is that a very rare celestial event, the once every 2 or 3 year transit of the planet Mercury across the surface of the sun on the 11th, on Monday the 11th, is going to take place. The last one was several years ago. I was able to actually measure it with the Accutron. This year, for reasons that are kind of just too boring, I'm not able to measure this one, but it's based on our previous measurements, both of the Venus transits and the Mercury transits, and of course lunar eclipses, which are also transits of something big, something close to Earth. I can tell you categorically that the physics, when you get that alignment of sun, planet, or sun and bigger planet, the physics goes nuts. It's amplified. And it's amplified different places at different intensities at different times during the 5 or so hours of the eclipse. And again, I base this on actual physical Accutron inertial repeating measurements. I was able to do both at Coral Castle during eclipses and transits, as well as the top of the Sandias, 2,000 miles to the west and half a mile plus in the sky, atop a huge slab of 70 million year old Cretaceous amplifying limestone. Anyway, so that's going to happen on Monday, New Mexico time. If you go to theothersideofmidnight.com, that's our website, click on tonight's banner for Ken Wheeler, and that will take you to the guest page. Scroll down a bit, you'll see fast links to items. Click on mine, that takes you to my first item, the science of the 2019 Mercury transit how astronomers will study the rare celestial event. And there's some really, really, really good science in there, which when you overlay it with the hyperdimensional physics that I was just describing, there's a lot of stuff that's going to be in the fan in and around, the nation's capital over the next month or two. And it's not accidental. It's part of this physics. Another part of the physics, which we're going to spend extensive time talking about tonight with my guest, is this extraordinarily intriguing phenomenon that, as I said in the promo that I worked up for tonight's blog talk and Facebook posts, I mean, what kid has not played around with magnets? One or more magnets, and tested the repulsion and the attraction and the invisibility, and the bigger the magnets, the more powerful, and the stranger the phenomenon, and you could put things on paper and then use the magnet to concentrate the field so you could see these things called field lines. I mean, every kid, at least every kid I knew growing up, at one point or the other, out of stuff you find in kitchens back then, did magnetic field stuff, because it was so physically palpable of the line between the visible and the invisible, that line in science as well as in metaphysics. Anyway, my guest tonight, Ken Wheeler, during high school took college courses. His teachers and professors referred to him as an outer stellar anomaly with a magical gift for translating concepts, mathematics, and ancient languages. He surprised everyone when he translated Pali, an ancient Indian language older than Sanskrit, along with Brahmanic Sanskrit and ancient Greek. Ken is extremely prolific with over 6,000 videos, translating for books he writes along with photography. Currently, he's working on 3 books, including the 4th edition of one of his books, and he's just finished writing the 2nd edition of the translation of the Dhammat Pali Ali, an ancient Pali text. Pali has been a dead language for over 2,000 years, as you can tell from my pronunciation. He admits, that is, Ken admits that he's had dreams of ancient languages, that we all could. Ken was greatly influenced by a very famous metaphysician who was honored on an Indian stamp, Dr. Ananda Kantish Kumaswamy, Dr. A.K. Kumaswamy. His son, Rama P. Kumaswamy, a cardiac surgeon, gave Ken the rights to all of his father's books as long as he did not change or charge for them. Ken lived in Russia for a few years doing Russian translations for the U.S. government. In addition, Ken has the largest website on the camera recommendations. Fujifilm loves him. So without further ado, Mr. Wheeler, welcome to the other side.
Hello, sir. How are you doing this evening?
Doing really, really well. I'm fascinated by these measurable physics now that we can do with things like alignments and transits and squares and tangents and whatever. So to me, it's the coincidence of the things that are going on in the political realm and the coincidence of some really bizarre things going on in the astronomical realm is not, in fact, a coincidence after all, but a real measurable physics.
This is true. Everything, as far as human interactions, is certainly mirrored so in fields where we're either repulsed by something or attracted by something or stopped. So the sort of conscious psychophysical reactions that humans have seem to mimic everything I see in field theory almost perfectly. Seems like everything is mimicked as above, so below, as the saying goes. So always interested in the irreducible simplicity of everything, and if you can get to the root of everything, then everything else kind of follows. You don't have to know everything, but you have to know the foundation. By knowing the foundation, you should be able to understand all the minutia that's underneath it, even if it's extremely complicated.
Let me ask you this. We're going to talk about some very complex concepts tonight, things that I know people are not familiar with because I'm not familiar with a lot of them, and I try to keep up on a lot of stuff. So we're going to have to take baby steps, please, for my benefit, before we, gallop off into the sunset.
Surely.
Your background is very eclectic, ancient languages, resurrecting from the dead, languages that should have died thousands of years ago, 6,000 produced videos. Hell, man, that's superhuman right there. Yeah. And but how did you wind up becoming a world-class expert on perhaps the most mysterious aspect of what a kid can do in a lab kind of physics, namely magnetic fields?
I was fundamentally always interested in fields. I was really always interested in the fundamental foundation of everything. I knew that a lot of the things that I was taught in school, and certainly so in college, University of Kentucky, and countless other places, was nonsensical, and I was always extremely interested, not in history for the sake of history, but looking in epochs of human history, and specifically what the ancient Greeks and Egyptians and Indians had to say about things. And Greeks were extremely interested in fields, or the ancient Greek term kora, and what this was. Of course, no branch of modern science has ever defined a field in itself.
I was just going to break in and say, can you please define a field?
Yeah, it's in very simplex would be an ether perturbation. I mean, if we talk about in simplest analogy, like a child would think that ice, water, and steam are three different things, but of course we as adults know that that's silly, with our greater intelligence, or rather should be wisdom, as opposed to empirical knowledge. That these are different temperature and pressure modalities, obviously, of water. And of course, all these fields are nothing other than different ether modalities of one and the same thing. You actually have field modalities that are either circular or transverse or longitudinal pulse perturbations like light. But specifically regarding science, an interesting thing that I've not read anywhere, but that I notice is that every epoch of scientific understanding, whether that be 50 years in span or 30 years, sometimes they're greater, sometimes they're longer, they've always thought they had a firm bead on how natura naturans, or Mother Nature, if you will, worked. And whether that be 30 or 50 or 100 years later, they were always proven nearly 100% wrong. And as we currently sit, this is certainly no different than any other point in history. We're certain we've got a firm bead on everything, and we absolutely do not, of course.
See, the question I always have when I have these conversations is, because of the concepts that we're going to talk about and that you lay out quite plainly, and that are coming at us from a variety of different researchers, real, what I call citizen scientists, it's so axiomatically true that there is, quote, an ether or torsion field, or whatever name you want to give it, and it makes stuff happen. It makes matter happen. It makes energy transitions happen. It makes consciousness happen. It makes the 3D universe possible. And yet there's this incredible divergence between where the data is and where mainstream academic, quote, reality, close quote, is, and never the twain shall meet. My key question, how is that incredible, totally counterintuitive, non-fact-based reality maintained decade after decade after decade?
Well, we're in a currently epoch of atomism. Nikola Tesla specifically said that the ether must exist. Nikola Tesla, of course, spoke great ill against Einstein. He called him a fuzzy-haired crackpot and countless other things, specifically that Einstein reified space as having properties. Ultimately, analogously, space is certainly no different than a shadow. We all grew up with Star Trek and Star Wars, bending space-time, curvature of space-time, but Nikola Tesla said the curvature of space is absolutely impossible. It has attributes, just like a shadow has attributes. If you stand in a shadow, you're going to get cold. Therefore, a shadow must be something, because if you stand in a shadow, it's going to affect you. But a shadow is not a thing itself. This is called principal reification, and it's a fallacy. The Greeks talked about this at great length, or at least Plotinus did. Shadow is, of course, merely an absence of light. Ultimately, speaking about fields, a shadow is not a thing. But ultimately, getting back to what I mentioned a couple minutes ago, there's only two foundations of reality that can be built. No one throughout any point in history has ever postulated anything other than two foundations of reality, or natura naturans, or Mother Nature. Foundation number one is atomism. We're currently living in an epoch of atomism, as I call it, the cult of bumping particles. In other words, Mother Nature is a crazy chick with a giant bag of magic particles, and they bump and interact, and that's the only way anything happens. The other foundation of the house, if you will, the concrete foundation, is the ether. And no one throughout any point in history has ever postulated any foundation other than that. And I'll stick with Nikola Tesla, Faraday, James Clerk Maxwell, Oliver Heaviside, and Charles Proteus Steinmetz. I mean, these are the gods and geniuses of electrical and field theory. These are the guys that have countless thousands of patents, as opposed to people like Einstein and what I like to refer to, forgive me by calling it the cult of quantum. Quantum is, of course, atomism, but that's where we live in currently. This isn't as
well, see, again, this is another example of where the real scientific, reproducible reality, which is that Michelson and Morley really did detect an ether, and Dayton Miller, following them and a couple of other guys, overwhelmingly confirmed, direction, flow, speed, entrainment with the rotating Earth, all of that good stuff. And then you got this divergent fiction that relativity is king. There is no ether. Everything has to have happening simultaneously. The speed of light is the same in all directions. It's measurably not. So you got this bifurcated reality. And again, how do they manage decade after decade to pull this off?
Well, it's starting to collapse. I actually made a video just 4 days ago about a big article that was posted. I'm sorry, I don't have the link in front of me, of course, but it's a scientific article talking about the ether making a resurgence. However, the most evil word, if you will, not really useful in quantum, is to even mention the ether. But they've actually supplanted ether these past many decades by calling it several different things. And of course, it doesn't matter what you call it. A rose by any other name is still a rose and smells the same. They've actually called it quantum foam. They've called it dark energy. They called it 0-point energy. It doesn't matter what you call it, as the ether. Specifically, and this is by their own admission from their own mouths, the only reason why they've called it dark energy is, and this is literally their own words, they call it dark because they don't know what it is. These are their words, not mine. Mm-hmm. And they call it energy because of the interactions and, the resultant consequence of, wow, something happened here. We don't know what this is. So, and they've said that general consensus, I think they've agreed to something like 78% of the universe by their own admission is quote-unquote dark energy, but they have no idea what it is, and that's why they call it dark energy. And it's okay not to know. The important thing, and I've said this in countless videos, is that if you think you know the answer to something, you never go looking for the answer to that thing you think you know the answer to. And in their academic hubris, they are certain what they know because that's what they were taught by the PhD in front. This is the way it is. And every epoch of science is exactly the same, and they're always disproven X number of years or decades later.
However, I think the frequency of these revolutions or these sub-revolutions is rapidly decreasing. That we're getting many more per unit time than there used to be, and it's accelerating.
I don't know if that's accelerating off a cliff or an accelerating to better understanding. I don't know where that's going to go. What's your conclusion on that one?
Well, I see some real breakthrough stuff on the horizon, if not, right around us, and a willingness to think outside the box. This whole climate discussion is part of a larger frame for what kind of environment do we want, and how can we get there? I mean, the incredible, almost hypnotic hypocrisy of stolen fossil fuels that are going to kill us when we know how to tap in to the torsion field / magnetic domain and produce limitless non-polluting energy, like sliding frictionlessly across an equipotential surface. I mean, that's the crime of the millennium, because those decisions are having mega consequences because they're in the wrong cycle of the background physics, planetary cyclic phenomenon at the underpinnings of everything.
Hopefully we'll break over top of that hill without falling off of a cliff, but I can't prognosticate on that. So that's a very good question. I wish I had an answer for that one.
Well, some of it has to do with well, that's part of a further discussion down the line, but there's not an immiscibility between the fields and consciousness affecting the fields. It's kind of like, that great line out of Star Wars.
Which one? I've seen all the Star Wars. So I don't know what the green light was in reference to.
Well, Yoda, you don't.
You're talking about the Force.
Yeah, there is no such thing as try. You just do it.
Correct. Subconscious action, but not action in the empirical sense. But
so let's go back to when you got it. We got a few minutes to the bottom of the hour. When you, as a kid, got intrigued with this feel stuff, and quickly discovered that there was more to this than has been written about.
I started at an early age looking at the works of Pythagoras. Of course, I didn't know ancient Greek at that point in time. Still studying Russian and other languages like French and German, but really what I consider to be like 95% of the really important philosophical stuff is either in ancient Pali or Sanskrit or specifically ancient Greek. And they talked about fields endlessly, and I think I've got basically every major book ever written on the topic of magnetism. And if you ever want to confound a scientist or a PhD physicist, just ask them to define what a field is in itself by itself, and of course their eyes will bug out, and they'll stutter. And it's okay not to know the answers to things. I don't believe in what millennials are very famous for is putting someone on the spot. I gotcha. I'm not interested in that, but it's important to confess whether it be me or somebody else that I don't know, and that's a great starting place. But when you post this hubristic, well, I have a PhD, I know what a field. They can never tell you what a field is. They've never defined a field. I've offered people money. I said, go find the definition of a field, not the four Maxwellian field equations, but what is a field. And like Feynman, Richard Feynman, who's one of the founders of quantum, even he himself said that none of us have ever defined the term energy, and of course they have not. And you have to start with a position that you don't know, rather than this sort of academic hubris that, well, I have a PhD and my word is God. Don't you dare question me. That doesn't get any of us anywhere. But specifically on the ether or on relativity, and I'll quote Nikola Tesla, who said, all literature on this subject, relativity and curved space-time, is futile and destined to oblivion, unquote. Greatest mind, even more intelligent than Nikola Tesla, however, nowhere near as many patents, is James Clerk Maxwell, who said this medium of propagation, the ether, must exist. The medium must be a prominent thought in our investigations. This is his book on treatise on electricity and magnetism. These are the gods of field theory and electricity, for which we have everything today. And they're not like primitive minds or anything. It's like, well, that's old stuff. We know better now. It's like, that's not the case. It's completely not the case. Like, once again, we get to this irreducible foundation of either atomism or the ether, and there is no other foundation upon which to build the house of, the correct picture of cosmic mechanics or Mother Nature.
But the ether itself, if you define it down to its ultimate particulate existence, has got to be granular as opposed to being seamless. There's got to be quantum steps between the ultimate particles of the ether.
Well, we can't particleize it because it's the foundation of particles. We actually have to talk about it in the sense of non-Cartesian substrate, literally the principle by which everything else is manifest. And of course, this is a concept in metaphysics that's occurred by the Greeks and the Indians, so we can't confuse nothing with no thing. Nothing, of course, i.e. nihil ex nihilo, from nothing comes nothing. We're not talking about nothing, but rather this non-Cartesian counter space, this subspace, and to use a current science fiction reference I've heard, everybody's heard subspace 1,000 times. Of the science fiction, but it doesn't matter what we call it, but we have the correct concept or idea in our heads. But Nikola Tesla called it, he didn't particleize it, but he used a particle type of reference. He called it I believe from Nikola Tesla's exact quote is something like a very finest substance. I'm sorry, I might be misquoting him on that. I can't remember the exact quote from Tesla.
I'm thinking, I mean, this is going to get a radical left-hand door open, but if you followed any of the literature on the so-called Pleiadians, the Billy Meyer contact, and any of the reportage of the notes, the communications from these ostensible ETs to Billy Meyer, the Swiss farmer.
I can't comment. Oh, sorry, go ahead. I apologize.
Well, there are sections of those notes where you get this kind of physics, but communicated through an itinerant source from, dimensions or source material itself, which is well nigh unbelievable, except it cross-correlates.
Walter Russell and Edgar Cayce fell along those lines. I don't know if you're familiar with a lot of the works of Walter Russell. I digitized all his primary works, although Walter Russell himself never defined a field, and he was a very simple man. And I was actually threatened over the past couple of years by someone took some pictures of some rare drawings of his, very high resolution. I have 54 of them, and I was just giving them out freely. Like, these are the drawings of Walter Russell, and his society had threatened me. How dare you give those out? They're not under copyright. They're not sold in a book form, but very, very, very simple man. He's a brilliant sculptor. But his drawings are absolutely fascinating. But, as Kumaraswamy said, nothing is known except through the modality of the knower. I mean, Walter Russell, as well as Kumaraswamy, myself, and everybody throughout history, is only expressing things through the particular subjectivity that we understand. Like, if we had intelligent fish, they would make, water analogies and all sorts of stuff that we couldn't relate to. But everybody's mind has a certain linguistic structure, and they try to relate what they understand or know or want to express to other people through their own particular subjective conscious substructure. So, Walter Russell might use different words. I try to, understand what he's saying, or that be Edgar Cayce or even Nikola Tesla. We all have our own little quirky ways of trying to define what it is that we understand, which is, of course, not linguistic. It immediately pops into our head. We have an understanding, and we have to try to translate it and write it down or say it to people. And this, of course, creates confusion and anger and conflict and everything else. And it's probably the reason why humanity is doomed, at least partially so, but I digress.
Well, that's an interesting digression. Something of an optimist. Or what was it Sulu said to Chekhov during one of the original Star Treks? He sure speaks gloomy.
I've seen every Star Trek episode a lot. I grew up with it, and just a couple hours ago I was watching Star Trek Enterprise.
Gene was a genius. Really. I've been watching this Enterprise series consecutively, like binge watching in between a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah.
And I can't understand why it didn't click. It's damn good.
It is, and they had those.
Really, really. Do you hear that, guys? Enterprise was damn good. So what happened? Was it too good? Did it fill in too many gaps for people that could read between the lines?
Surely it has to boil down to somebody in accounting with a calculator working the numbers. It has nothing to do with whether something's good or not. And, they said, hey, this isn't making enough money, or maybe we should do this instead of that. And that's, I guess, those are the people that ruin good movies and good TV shows. I'm only guessing on that, but I've heard many actors express that fact.
Well, I wonder how many dollars they saved. How many? I don't remember offhand how many seasons it went, but it's really building very nicely, and it's got all that glue. Knowing Gene, knowing what he was trying to do way back in the dark ages of television. I mean, Enterprise, his mentorees, they really pulled it off. Anyway, my guest this morning is Ken Wheeler. We're talking about fields, and I'm not talking about JC. And you're on the other side of midnight. My name is Richard C. Hoagland. we shall return.
theothersideofmidnight.com. Tune in to listen to Richard C. Hoagland and his fascinating guests. Join Club 19.5 to get access to exclusive member benefits. Listen to past episodes anytime on any device. Search the archives of over 180 episodes. Membership costs $9.95 a month, 33 cents a day. Support the broadcast that provides you with the most interesting conversation available. Talk radio at the cutting edge of science and thought. theothersideofmidnight.com.
And welcome back, everyone. On this Saturday night, the 9th of November, where is the year going? Tomorrow night, by the way, I want to give a kind of a heads up on the promo. Tomorrow night, we're deliberately playing or replaying an extraordinary show that 1 year ago tomorrow night I had on the other side of midnight with our resident historian, Dr. Richard Spence. And what we were trying to do is to take apart 100 years before the historical vicissitudes, the randomness of bizarre anomalies just struck out of nowhere that led to the inexorable horrors of World War I. And of course, the question we're posing by running the show again, given what's going on in the Middle East and who's in the White House and who's in Russia and who's not, could this cacophony of things we do not want happen again? Okay, again, sorry to wander a bit off the reservation, but I keep thinking that if even some of the most basic discoveries, the kind of stuff we're going to be talking about over the next couple, 3 hours, if it was actually brought to market where people could free themselves from, the inevitability of centralized power, which is, got a chokehold on a civilization, the world would be a stunningly different, and I would argue stunningly better place. You agree or disagree?
I do agree, but I also have to admit my shortcomings in saying that I can't extremely intelligently comment on that fact. I don't know which parameter on many different fronts, obviously so, but that I can say that I can speak, to that subject, with any great power. I'm sure, or that I've done an enormous amount of study on that fact. Specifically on the energy front, the answer would be yes. I actually thought for many, many years that free energy was not possible. Of course, energy is everywhere, and so far as free or manifesting it out of the ether, I thought impossible, and actually gave it a lot of consideration. Now I'm 100% certain that it absolutely is possible. But I forever resisted that in my head, but I always have to keep an open mind, and I'm certain that it is possible.
Welcome to the club.
A lot of the postulations for free energy, though, were the dead ends, and, that obscures free energy itself in its most, root form. So that was always a dark cloud hovering over top of the real gem, if you will.
See, part of the problem, I think, has been we're kind of stuck in nomenclature. The concept of free in our 3D reality, dog eat dog, entropy, hot to cold, that kind of thing, the inexorability of time, death and taxes, you name it, leads us to become incredibly suspicious of the idea that anything is for free. So I remember dinner some years ago, Robin and I attended in Amsterdam, where we were able to convince the Energy Project people to change the name of their proposed conference series and to call it Breakthrough Energy. Because if it's accepted, it's a breakthrough both on a technological and political and economic front, and it will change society for the better.
It will. However, there'd be a huge upheaval, and the people that are certainly keeping that secret know that there would be a massive global earthquake, not a literal earthquake, but a massive global earthquake on several different fronts were that to release. But
well, why is that axiomatic? I mean, if you have a potential resource with infinite potential, the way you manage its filtration into society is you do, like with any legislation, you phase it in over time.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm not against it at all. I'm speaking.
It's my grandmother would say, you can do anything, if you have the cornucopia of riches. Here we only have to figure out how to manage in a human system that has fail-safes, a system of controlling the infinite. That's one of the reasons I think philosophically this has been so hard to bring to market in a 3D world, 3D reality, because it's a reality that transcends our 3D reality, and it's set up some doozies of some anomalies in getting the politics in line with consciousness.
And we're all wandering around like zombies, trying to pay the bills and working hard, laboring hard so we can buy labor-saving devices. It's an endless rat race, and everything is so interconnected that certainly the entities that control this, not speaking to anyone specifically, are certainly worried about upsetting the cart, if you will. I mean, that has to be the conclusion. That's purely speculative on my part, obviously. So then we have to ask ourselves, what is energy? I mean, a generator, take the Hoover Dam, for example, and I've visited it more than a few times. Whether we're talking about a two-phase or three-phase generator, what is energy itself? I mean, nothing is literally being emitted from the generator. There is no transference of the falling water or the solar panel or the winds. There's no transference between the winds and the AC generator or the water and the generator. So what is energy? And it's an ether perturbation, of course. I mean, that's all a power generator is. Then we have to ask ourselves the question, do we actually have to have some sort of movement, be it solar or wind or nuclear or water or otherwise, to actually generate energy? And I gave that years of consideration, and it absolutely does not. I mean, ether torsion itself could certainly be a very simplex device wherein which energy is generated with no necessitative input, be it nuclear, wind, or water, or otherwise. We're talking about an ether torsion wheelworks construction. I mean, Nikola Tesla's great idea of the AC generator was watching the phases of the moon and how it was chasing around the Earth, and he immediately drew in the sand, supposedly, the AC generator, his wonderful invention. But I mean, power is not emitted literally from an AC generator. We're talking about an ether perturbation device that necessitates an input. So is energy possible without that input? And the answer is logically and undeniably yes. But a lot of the dead ends that I was referring to, I mean, a giant cloud or many countless clouds actually hung over top of free energy. I just had to wipe those away and consider it on its bare face, as several other people have done, like Dollard and otherwise.
Well, see, the only way you can logically consider the idea of free energy is if you consider there's other levels of reality than the three dimensions that we experience.
Oh, undeniably so.
So what you're doing with tapping into so-called free energy is opening a plenum, a gateway, a doorway between these dimensions, and the energy and the information flow into our 3D reality. Problem of perpetual motion solved.
Yeah, in other words, in a simplex analogy, can we actually stick a doorstop on the door, if you will, between these dimensions and allow energy to flow, as opposed to what humanity is currently doing via all forms of energy generation, wherein which we have one or several different types of individuals perpetually exerting energy via their hands, analogously, via their hands to keep the door propped open. In other words, the door will only stay open when someone is expending calories, if you will, to keep that door open. And then we have to ask ourselves the question, can we actually, do we have a device, analogously, where we could stick a block on the door and nothing has to be exerted to allow the passage of that energy from there to here?
Mm-hmm. And
that necessitatively must exist.
Well, the question I was asking was, have you found it?
No, God, no. I would never presume to make any such claim as that. I've given it a great deal of thought, but no, I mean, I would have either been one killed off already by some entity, or moved on to some other, I don't know what. Well, I would never be able to patent something like that. I assume I would be squirreled away or either killed. That doesn't sound like a conspiracy. That would certainly be reality if someone actually, a private individual, came up with that and they squeaked about it. I assume that they would vanish, and that's certainly undeniable. I mean, that poses far too great of a risk to that person or persons.
Well, I mean, there are ways to manage that. Like what we've done is we've set up triggers so that in the event that something unforeseen were to happen to me, a whole bunch of things would get emailed automatically to a whole bunch of people. And over the years, I know a lot of people. As Art and I discussed many years ago, the ultimate insurance policy in this business is notoriety, being visible, being very visible, being really blatantly, ostentatiously visible.
Well, the Utah Data Center tried to eliminate that so everybody is ultimately visible. Whether you think you're invisible or not, you're extremely visible.
Well, yeah.
We got a tracking device, that we perpetually, everybody now is addicted to their cell phones. It tracks everything you do, where you go, what you say. Your phone's always listening to you. And that's not fringe at all. That's absolute reality. Even Snowden, I think, made a 2-hour video. He used to work for the NSA about the ways you think your cell phone tracks you. He made like a 2-hour-long video, and he worked for the NSA.
Who was it? Who a couple of 3 years ago? Kellyanne Conway, who was, attacked viciously for being some kind of a, blonde ninny, for saying that her refrigerator was eavesdropping on her.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw the breaking news today, but it was been going on now for, I believe, 8 years. There's an entity somewhere up in the Northeast. They were selling surveillance security monitoring cameras that actually had Chinese firmware installed that were networked. And it broke as national news, and the CIA and the FBI crashed in on them. They were putting USA-made stickers on the software for the installation of these, and then they were network security system. They were not closed-circuit security, and these had been sold for the past many, many years to military installations, top-secret facilities, including battleships. Absolutely unbelievable. They were literally Chinese security recording devices and the software for them.
No, wait, this is not to be confused with the so-called kamikaze chips?
No, this actually broke today. It was on all 3 major news networks, unbelievably, which almost never happens. But
well, that's intriguing, because some years ago, one of my sources tipped me off. And I tried to go on network radio and talk about it, and they sat on the story. They would not let me discuss it on network radio. Outright censorship.
Strange.
And it had to do with Chinese salting the market with chips, which basically had kamikaze drop-dead dates built into their firmware. So they'd run the heart of a system, let's say an electro-optical system for targeting missiles on a battlefield, and they run to their drop-dead date, and then they suddenly stop working. And I was going to talk about the source of the story, the validations with the DoD, and Nuri would not have it. He threw a small cat fit.
It's not surprising, and not meaning him, but that would happen.
Yep. Anyway, so why don't we kind of swing into the meat of the matter? Because we've been discussing things that to people sound abstract, like energy from a higher dimension. Let's talk about machines, magnetic machines that you have known and loved, which actually can do this.
I don't purport to have any machines that actually release free energy. I've created a few very interesting devices. If a patent wasn't so extremely expensive, I'd have several patents right now. I have a millionaire buddy that I've known now for 30-some years that has currently 4 patents, and he's a multimillionaire, and he complains about getting patents, and I don't have those financial resources at all. My ultimate interest is in fundamentally understanding what magnetism is. We can actually create a lot of these devices, and I have created several extremely interesting things that are, have real-world applications, such as gold collection, a la baby powder gold and the diamagnetic natures of gold, that it would actually drop out of the laminar flow of water for gold sluicing. And I've had a lot of people that I've actually worked with, including in Canada, to help them install magnetic arrays. So they would actually.
So this is a magnetic technology that would be dropped in the water, in the open water, or in a sluice situation, and it would interact with the gold in the water and concentrate it.
It's actually attached to a rack, and since people don't understand what magnetism is, or that each side of a pole, or if you will, a face of a magnet, has actually different properties, like the central port of a magnet actually is a centripetal convergence, and then the outer edge is the only true magnetism, and that actually interacts with the gold and the diamagnetic nature of gold. A lot of the gold actually collected both in Colorado and Alaska and countless other places, including Canada, washes out because it's baby powder gold. That's actually what they call it. In other words, the mass is such that it actually flows along with the water, so you end up shooting the water out the end of your sluice. But if you actually decelerate it out of the laminar flow of the water, then it will actually collect in the wiffles that they call it, or the moss, depending on what sort of sluicing system, so you're able to collect it. So by installing these simple magnetic arrays in the sluicing, they're able to collect a lot more gold. I'm also interested, and I've done countless videos on seed experimentation, a true suppressed work by Rawls and Davis. They created the magnetic blueprint of life, and another work that the FDA actually did suppress. However, there are a few hundred copies out there. It took me about 10 years to find a copy that I could scan in. Is the magnetic effects of and different polarity, and this is due to the phase shift of the magnetism itself between the North Pole and the South Pole. They did countless experiments on worms, chickens, seeds. Maybe you could make tomatoes grow more acidic or far less acidic. They would actually cause chickens, due to embryo exposure, to be either very healthy and grow up very aggressive, or to come out as weaklings. And they actually discovered this by accident by having a powerful magnetic field next to a cup of worms and dirt inside of a styrofoam cup. And then they went on, and they actually had a patent as far as seed exposure. I've had people out in Colorado that are growing stuff, and other people have done this experimentation, and I've made at least 30 or 40 videos showing that you get radically different seed growth. I actually experiment with different types of seeds. They have radically different outcomes. They taste different. They grow radically different. You have different robustness as far as the percentage of seeds that die. And it's absolutely fascinating. And but no one's talking about this anywhere on the internet or on YouTube. I mean, you remember the old Jack and the Beanstalk thing about magic seeds, quote unquote? We all had that child story. Well, I literally thought about going into business with my buddy, and we thought, however, concluded that we might be sued. Someone said, we came to the conclusion that, some crazy person might say, well, I ate these seeds and I developed a tumor or something, and this obviously is because of your magnetically exposed seeds. And we thought about the liability on that, but changed our mind. But I've made many videos, and I've told people to do the experiment themselves, and many, many people have. And, I didn't believe you, but I saw your videos, and you're not selling anything, and I did the experiment, and you're right. It's absolutely unbelievable. Radically different results due to seed exposure.
Mm.
Or you can get a more radical exposure if you actually expose the seeds as they're germinating. It only takes just a few minutes of exposure of the seeds. It sounds extremely strange, but it's actually extremely logical, and the results are undeniable.
So track through from the beginning. This is very important because it kind of marries together with things that Robin and I were taught in Central America when we were doing the measurements on the pyramids, and I was kibitzing back and forth with this Mayan priest, and I was showing him on the screen the measured effects of the accutron of the energies being amplified by the pyramid. And he was, metaphorically jumping up and down. He says, I never thought I'd see on a screen what my grandmother told me is going on with these things. And we're sitting on the top of this pyramid, looking at my laptop and measuring the frequency fluctuations of the inertia of the tuning fork.
I can't comment intelligently on that, but I can as far as real. When people talk about pyramid power, I'm not dismissing that one way or the other, but I've said in many countless videos, and I have some very expensive pyramid magnets. And there's a buddy of mine who used to be the largest seller. His name is George Mizell. He's located in Alabama. He calls himself Super Magnet Man. He actually traveled to China to have some special pyramidal magnets made. And this is a demonstrable fact. It is not, hearsay one way or the other. And this is visible underneath the ferrocell, which is a holographic magnetic viewing device, which, of course, you've got several pictures in front of you, that like a fireman's nozzle is tapered like a pyramid. And, of course, you get extremely high pressure. I'm trying to make a simplex analogy.
Mm-hmm.
Or, a nozzle for your garden hose.
Are we talking like a dunce cap type geometry?
Exactly, and these pyramidal magnets, they have extremely high. You can actually whip out
So this is not a flat, squat pyramid shape. This is a tall, narrow, what we're terming now the Russian pyramidal shape.
Actually, the base on these, most of them at the base is a ratio of 1 to 5. They can either be 3-sided or 4-sided. However, there's nobody on Earth that's making pyramidal magnets other than 2 entities. One's a Russian entity, which of course I'm not going to order those, and the other ones were actually ordered specifically under the specific parameters of George Mizell from China. Basically 100% of the world's neodymium iron boron magnets that are used in everything comes out of China, and he specifically ordered the specific geometries. But the little Gaussian flux by using a Gauss meter is extremely high, just as water, flows with high pressure out of a fireman's nozzle. The actual magnetic flux out of these pyramid magnets acts as a constrictor to the physical shapes of the magnets. So you actually have extremely high, and actually scientists and experimentation labs have ordered at great expense large Hallback arrays using a series of pyramidal magnets that where the points are pointed inwards, and you actually see this on George Mizell's videos, the Super Magnet Man on YouTube. They're inside of a steel casing, and there's 6 pyramidal magnets that make up a Hallback array, and this is a permanent magnet. There's no power required.
Wait a minute, wait. Let's not skip over that. Make up a Hallback array?
It refers to a specific type of magnetic array where you actually are focusing the force. So you have extremely high magnetic flux on each one of these pyramid magnets, but you set them in an array where they're all pointing inwards with a specific gap at the very dead center, kind of like a wheel, and at the center of which there is an extremely high magnetic field, the type of field that you would only get if you got a significant generator hooked up to an electromagnet, except this is permanent, and as long as you don't heat it or, wreck it with a sledgehammer, it's going to have that extremely high magnetic field in perpetuity. And this is not, hearsay or conjecture. I mean, it's demonstrable fact with a Gauss meter.
Well, when you say high magnetic field, give us some numbers. How high?
His best one that he made, and super expensive, I wish I could test it, is over 3 Tesla. The pyramids that I actually have in my kitchen, those are they're made out of 2 pieces. If you took a pyramid, for example, like the Egyptian pyramid, and chopped it off about halfway down, But you can only make them, you could actually only magnetize neodymium iron boron to a certain depth. And so if you have a super thick magnet like my pyramidal magnets, what you do is you make them in pieces. These specifically are two-piece, so the top of the pyramid you slide on with a wood block. You know, can't do it by hand because it'll literally break your fingers. They're so powerful. You have this pyramid with a 2-inch by 2-inch by 2-inch base that is about 3 inches tall, and the very tip of which is about 1/8 of an inch all around and square. And at the very tip of that is you can actually hold it very close to your skin. And, of course, we actually have iron in our blood. You can hold it around the veins of your wrist or around your lips or your nose. You can actually feel a tingling, like a very light electrostatic tingling. So you actually can feel the interaction with your human body. I mean, this is where you literally can feel a magnetic field. But with a Gauss meter, those are right over 1 Tesla, which is extremely strong for a permanent magnet, excuse me. Not very cheap. They average, the two pieces together average about $140 or $150, I believe. But,
so did you start out with this magnetic, analyses from the theoretical side, or did you start out with playing with hardware, doing experiments, mechanics?
Both. I mean, I understood very early on, ages ago, that fundamentally what we understand about magnetism is complete hogwash. Of course, due to lodestones, the Chinese had lodestones thousands of years ago. I think the earliest mention of a magnet is in some ancient Chinese text, is that we've had for these countless thousands of years this notion of magnetic attraction, but magnetism specifically is centrifugal force divergence. As Faraday himself said, the godfather of electricity, and Tesla and all the rest of them said that magnetism is the dielectric field. And to think of this in a very simplex analogy, we could think of magnetism as steam, and the dielectric as water, but obviously steam and water are exactly the same thing. They're just different temperature and pressure modalities of one and the same thing. That there's no such thing as magnetic attraction. And doing countless experimentation, like on extremely large and very dangerous magnets, the central part of a magnet has significantly different interactions as opposed to that of, the centrifugal or the outer edge, which is where true magnetism exists. We actually have this conjugate geometry of the universe, the hyperboloid and the torus. Torus, of course, being a donut shape, and the hyperboloid being an hourglass shape. And these two conjugate geometries form the foundation or wheelworks of the entire universe. And we see this mimicked in cosmic phenomena, looking at galactic jets and geomagnetic precession, where we actually have these toroidal and hyperboloidal geometries. I actually have that pulled up as image number 8 or number 12 that I actually sent you. This is the cross-section of the conjugate geometries of the entire universe, from macro to micro, from subatomic all the way to galactic. And this is the yin and the yang, or trying to think of another binary. There are countless binaries throughout metaphysics and all forms of myths that we have throughout the dawn of time, of what defines these two field geometries that are the most basic principles of the universe. So there's no such thing as magnetic attraction. This is a dielectric acceleration. I mean, attraction, of course, is not a force. Magnetism is a force. And like I said, Faraday said that magnetism is the dielectric field, and is absolutely correct. And then I, of course, get people to try to think in simplex terms. Well, what is a magnet? Well, it's this thing I have. I bought it off of eBay. I was like, well, before it became a magnet, it was quantitatively 100% the exact same object. And, of course, most people don't know how a magnet is made. Of course, we know that a magnet is made. Most people don't know that, like neodymiums, for example, are ceramic. They're neodymium iron boron. They're actually cast, and then they're heated, and they're either nickel plated, and that's, of course, very unimportant. But before it becomes a magnet, it is quantitatively identical before or after. Then I ask people, well, what is a magnet? And since it is not quantitative, obviously, therefore, it is qualitative, then what is it that you're actually calling a magnet? And I try to get people to come up with these countless different analogies to, draw them down the path to it's extremely simplex, and I can visualize in my mind, but I actually have to come up with these countless different analogies. Also, too, like convergence and divergence on weather phenomena, like image number 15 I have.
I'll tell you, hold it there. We're at the top of the hour. My guest this morning is Ken Wheeler, and we're talking about fields, invisible function, invisible force that has a measurable effect on stuff, on matter in motion. In some cases, matter not in motion, or matter imparts motion. Anyway, all of a piece. You're on the other side of midnight. My name is Richard C. Hoagland. We shall return. Thanks for listening to this exciting first hour. Now, the second and third hour of the show is available to Club 19.5 members only. Please support the show by subscribing to Club 19.5 and join our very interesting community. To do that, please visit the website, theothersideofmidnight.com, and click on the Join Club 19.5 link in the left-hand column. As a Club 19.5 member, you'll gain access to the rest of this show and all previous 350-plus shows that we have done. Now, recent Club 19.5 member archive recordings have the commercials removed, and the sound quality has been enhanced. You'll also receive a dedicated private podcast feed that contains these enhanced show recordings. And you'll be able to download the MP3 files directly from the archive if you prefer. As a Club 19.5 member, you'll also be the first to preview our new videos and reports. We'll be adding exclusive new features to Club 19.5 as we go forward, and boy, have we got some amazing things to tell you about in the coming weeks. So please support the show and don't miss all the exciting new things we have planned. I want to thank all our Club 19.5 members because without your guys' support, this show would not be on the air. Please help us continue growing the show by subscribing to Club 19.5 today. And when I say we really need you, we really need you. Over and out.